ELED 405, we have learned a lot of really important things. I think for me, though, my biggest takeaway from the course content has been regarding Brown versus Board of Education and its failure to truly desegregate schools. Most likely, all of us learned the same whitewash narrative in school about how Brown v. Board was great and closed the chapter on school segregation. However, we have learned in class through listening to podcasts and research in court cases that this sadly is not the case, and segregation is still alive and well in our public schools today. Speaking of which, this video will be drawing mainly from the podcast Miss Buchanan's Period of Adjustment, with some supplemental info from other sources such as the podcast Nice White Parents. Okay, but why are we talking about this? Well, besides that, the way the US went about trying to desegregate its schools was ineffectual and racist.
So Moberly, Missouri gets rid of its black teachers. And by the way, so does almost everybody else. Across the entire South, black teachers just get fired, left and right. It wasn't something done secretly, it was done right out in the open. There were something like 82,000 African-American teachers in the South before the Brown decision. Within a decade, as the decision was slowly implemented across the country, about half had been fired.
This failure has had massive consequences that greatly affect our students of color today. As future teachers, we need to know about this so we can ensure that we are supporting our students in the best possible ways. This is how this relates to our class content. With the knowledge of the barriers systematically placed in schools to prevent students of color from succeeding, what can we do as the people with the power in the classroom to provide the culturally relevant content that our students need and deserve? To fully understand, though, what the modern-day effects of desegregation's failures are, let's discuss the podcast Ms. Buchanan's Period of Adjustment. A recurring trend I have noticed in the content that we have been learning about is the motif of the white savior. Listen to this clip.
Now listen to the argument the Supreme Court makes in the Brown decision. They agree that the Browns ought to be able to send Linda to Sumner, but their reasoning is different. I'm quoting. Segregation of white and colored children in public schools has a detrimental effect upon the colored children. The court's conclusion was that segregation was de facto unequal, that simply the act of educating black children separately from white children caused harm, serious harm. The court goes on, segregation with the sanction of law has a tendency to retard the educational and mental development of Negro children.
It's saying that segregated schools were detrimental to black students because there were no white people in those schools. In other words, it's saying that black people couldn't possibly get a good education without white people. To them, only the presence of whites means that black children could reach their full potential. This is racist and misguided logic, of course, so why is it any kind of surprise then that the real-world results of this decision were racist and misguided? Hey, Editing Josh here. Just wanted to add more about this idea of it being white savior complex. The Supreme Court here is saying that people of color needed saving. It's like in the podcast Nice White Parents, when one of the members of the PTA said it felt like they were being saved against their will. In reality, segregation needed to end, but not because of anything to do with people of color needing to be saved, but instead because of the basic fact that segregation is wrong. That's it. The Supreme Court's decision does a good job of ignoring any need to further examine the systemic issue of racism because they were framing themselves, or in other words, the government and white people in general, as heroes, not as the ones who created this horrible situation in the first place. This brings us to the main point of Ms. Buchanan's Period of Adjustment. We did desegregation wrong. Instead of integrating the kids first, we should have integrated the teachers first. Of course, this didn't happen, and literal kids were instead forced to be the guinea pigs of integration. And furthermore, with integration occurring, most of the black schools in the South were shut down. Remember that audio clip that was played earlier?
Across the entire South, black teachers just get fired, left and right.
Yeah, over 40,000 black teachers were fired. Okay, let's fast forward now back to the present, even though it may be a bit abrupt. According to Ms. Buchanan's Period of Adjustment, the numbers of black teachers have never recovered since these mass firings. This means that there are far fewer black teachers proportionately to the number of black students in our school systems. As future teachers, we need to know the statistics that this podcast tells us about. Basically, white students are more likely to be in gifted and talented programs than black students. In fact, they are more than 2 times likely to receive placement than a black student of equal test scores. With this in mind, teachers are usually the ones who identify their students for gifted and talented programs. This means that the race of a black student's teacher has drastic effects on whether they will be placed in one of these programs or not. Having a white teacher means that a black student has half the chance of getting placed than if they had a black teacher. But we don't have that many black teachers due to the facts discussed earlier, which has resulted in the unequal placements we are seeing. Our students of color do not need to be saved. What they do need, though, is an advocate and somebody who genuinely cares about them in the classroom. We as teachers hold a lot of power in determining our students' futures. And now, I am of course not saying that all white teachers don't care about black students or any students of color, but what I am saying is that all white teachers need to examine their implicit biases that may be negatively harming their students. Another important thought is, and something that I learned from this content is, what can we as teachers do to cede our powers to others? Can we give our power to our students? Can we give it to community members who may have an important impact on our students? What can we do to positively impact all the students in our classroom and not just some of them? As a little side tangent, culturally relevant teaching is needed because if we don't have it, we get situations like the one from the podcast Nice White Parents. In Nice White Parents, a large group of white families all decide together to go to a local school that is comprised mainly of Latinx, Black, and Middle Eastern students. And as these white families go to this school, they decide that they need a dual language French program that basically only benefited the new families. They do this under the guise of wanting to save the school. That doesn't sound familiar at all. Thanks for watching my video. Hi, I know I just ended the video, but editor, hear me one more time. I just wanted to add a little more to my point. A dual language program has a huge opportunity to be culturally responsive when it comes from the community and those who attend the school, not when it comes from a bunch of families who were not involved with the school, and not when it involves a language that does not reflect the community. If the school involved in this podcast had decided to do a dual language Spanish or Arabic program, 2 languages that were commonly spoken in that school, then this would have been a great opportunity to be culturally responsive. Sadly, it didn't end up this way, though. It's important that as teachers we remember that what we teach sends a message. When, for example, in this situation, the French language is prioritized, it sends a message that it and the new white families moving into the school have more value. This is unacceptable, of course, and not culturally responsive. Okay, thanks for watching the video.